The sky above Helena, Montana was crystal clear that March night, with the stars spread out like a map only the bold could read. Sarah Wilkins, a 28-year-old meteorologist with the National Weather Service, stood on the back porch of her cabin sipping a mug of green tea. She had just wrapped up a long shift analyzing a pressure system moving over the Rockies, but what she saw now had nothing to do with weather. At first, she thought it was a plane, a soft white light drifting quietly across the sky. But then it stopped, dead in the air. No movement, no sound. And then it spun. A perfectly symmetrical spiral formed in the sky, its edges glowing faint blue and purple, rotating slowly, hypnotically. It looked artificial, too precise for nature. Sarah narrowed her eyes and instinctively reached for her phone, but the screen remained black. She frowned. Battery was full when she stepped out. She tried the flashlight. Nothing. She turned toward the door to call her partner, Thomas, but froze. The entire valley below had gone dark. All the houses, normally speckling the landscape like a distant town of fireflies, were blacked out. Even the highway was still. No headlights, no hum of late-night traffic. Something was wrong, and she wasn't the only one who noticed. Across town, Deputy Marshal Eli Garrett had just finished his patrol along Canyon Ferry Road when the radio cut out. He reached for the dash-mounted device, but all he got was static. A second later, the engine of his cruiser sputtered, then died. The lights blinked, then faded. He cursed under his breath, grabbing his flashlight and stepping out. That's when he looked up. "What in the hell?" he muttered. Above him, the same spinning orb, like a whirlpool made of light, hung over the horizon. Its center pulsed slowly, rhythmically, like a heartbeat. It wasn't just spinning, it was glowing, almost alive. Suddenly he heard it, a low-frequency hum, more felt than heard, buzzing in his chest cavity, vibrating his bones. He clutched his shirt and looked around. Every animal in the area had gone silent. No crickets, no owls, no wind. Then a sharp pop in the sky. A second orb blinked into existence, smaller but faster. It darted out of the spiral and zigzagged across the sky at impossible angles, like a bee on caffeine. It made no sound. Sarah watched from her porch, transfixed. This was not a flare, not a drone, not northern lights. This was technology she couldn't even begin to explain. And then, just like that, it vanished. The sky went black again. Not dark, black, as if someone had peeled the stars away. Her knees buckled, and she fell to the ground, heart racing. The porch light flickered, then came back on. Cell signal returned. The power returned. The stars returned. But something had changed. Moments later, her phone buzzed. A message from the NWS emergency channel. Unexplained aerial phenomenon reported. Multiple counties. Do not engage, stay indoors. More information to follow. Sarah stared at the message. Her hands trembled. This wasn't weather. This wasn't science. This was a warning. Their stay indoors. More information to follow. Sarah stared at the message. Her hands trembled. This wasn't weather. This wasn't science. This was a warning. 300 miles south, at Malmstrom Air Force Base, Major Alec Rourke was mid-briefing when the base lost power. Not a flicker, a full drop. No alarms, no sirens, just silence. Seconds later, red emergency lights flickered to life. The room glowed dimly as the digital displays behind him went black, and every laptop in the room died at once. Rourke's voice cut the silence. "Secure the facility! Now!" 2 airmen ran out. Others checked their radios. No signal. In the chaos, one monitor rebooted. Not with the base's systems, but with a grainy black and white video feed. The room froze. "What is that?" whispered Captain Morales. The footage showed a live view of the base perimeter. Above the runway, the same swirling spiral, pulsing slowly. Below it, dozens of security personnel stood frozen in place, staring upward like statues. None moved, none spoke. One soldier, barely visible near the edge of the frame, lifted a hand to his helmet mic, and then crumpled to the ground. The screen went black again. Major Rourke gritted his teeth. "This is a coordinated interference. I want hardwired comms with NORAD, right now." But no one moved. Everyone in the room was looking at their skin, their arms, their necks, where tiny, flickering dots of static danced like mild static electricity. Morales broke the tension. "Sir, I think we're being scanned." Rourke didn't argue. Deep in his gut, something primal told him the same. Back in Helena, Sarah Wilkins had driven to town, where panic had taken root. The diner lights flickered like strobes. People gathered around parked cars with dead batteries. At the gas station, the pumps were frozen. Inside, the clerk was furiously trying to reach someone on a landline. No luck. At the center of town, a small crowd gathered around a man with a satellite radio. He was playing a recording from one of the national HAM networks, a message being rebroadcast from the East Coast. Reports now coming in from Pennsylvania, Texas, and New Mexico. Objects identical in shape and behavior to those seen over Montana are being tracked by civilian and military observatories. Communications are failing. Airports have been instructed to ground all flights indefinitely. The Department of Defense has issued a soft lockdown on all critical infrastructure. Sarah's heart dropped. "It's national." A woman next to her nodded, pale. "Global, maybe. My cousin in Norway texted me just before everything went dark. They saw it too." Just then, the static returned. This time not just in the air, but inside the radios, car speakers, even through powered-off phones. It was as if the signal didn't need electricity anymore. It just was. And within that signal, a whisper. Not words, just a suggestion. Everyone heard something different. A memory, a sound from their past. Some heard a mother's voice, others a dog barking, a lullaby, a siren. Sarah heard her father, who had died 5 years ago, whisper, "You're not ready yet." Her knees went weak. Meanwhile, Deputy Marshal Eli Garrett had made his way to the sheriff's department. Power was out here too, but a backup generator had kicked on, illuminating the emergency map. It was lit up with red pins, one for each reported sighting. The pins now covered 4 states. He stared at the blinking screen. Something was moving, or coordinating, across a massive range. And yet, there was no invasion, no weapons, just presence, visibility. Eli's partner, Hank, walked in, wide-eyed. "You need to see the live stream." He handed Eli a phone, streaming footage from a storm chaser in Kansas. It was the spiral. But this time, it was changing. The center wasn't just spinning, it was opening. A black void swirled in the middle, like an iris dilating, expanding outward. Then it stopped, held steady, hovering silently in the night sky. And from the center, something descended. Not a ship, not a beam, a line, thin, silver, perfectly straight. Eli stared. "What is that?" he whispered. The storm chaser zoomed in, but before the camera could focus, the screen went black. The morning after the spiral appeared, America woke up changed. Mainstream news was calling it the phenomenon. Social media, barely functional under the strain of mass uploads and fear-driven speculation, was flooded with shaky footage of spirals hovering over cities. Atlanta, Denver, Seattle, Chicago. The silver line appeared in more than one video, but no one had touched it. No one had gotten close. Until now. In the rugged outskirts of Billings, Montana, where cattle outnumbered people, rancher Paul McCready had never believed in aliens, conspiracies, or government weather weapons. But what he found tangled in his fence at dawn changed everything. It was metal, or at least something like it. A narrow, needle-like rod, no thicker than a pencil and nearly 3 feet long, was lying across his northern pasture, humming faintly. It pulsed with the same color palette Sarah had seen in the sky, purples and icy blues dancing in slow waves across its surface. It hadn't fallen. It had been placed. Paul, calloused and skeptical, poked it with a stick. Nothing. He leaned closer. The hum grew louder, but not in sound, in feeling. It pulsed through his chest, making his heart skip a beat. He backed away quickly and grabbed his old satellite phone. "I'm calling the sheriff," he muttered. But before he could press dial, the device lit up on its own. Not the screen, the metal rod. It glowed, then it vanished. One blink, gone. The grass beneath it wasn't burnt. No hole, no residue. As if it had simply decided to stop being there. Across the state, Sarah Wilkins sat in the Helena University Observatory, which had come back online just an hour ago. She and 3 other scientists were reviewing time-lapse satellite footage of the spirals across the U.S. They weren't random. Every spiral that appeared followed a pattern, a rotation, a timed entrance and exit. She traced the shapes on a digital map, overlaying the locations. Her eyes widened. It formed a web, like interconnected nodes on a network. Each spiral had appeared in a perfect line with the others. A geometrical alignment too precise to be accidental. "These are landing coordinates," she whispered. Dr. Neville, her senior colleague, leaned in. Or, worse, anchor points. She stared at him. Anchor for what? Before he could answer, the computers shut off. Again. Only this time, it wasn't a blackout. The screens went black, and stayed black. Every surface reflected their own terrified faces. Then, from the overhead speaker, a voice. It wasn't male or female. It wasn't even human. It was layered, synthetic, almost like a choir whispering from a void. "We are not visiting. We are returning. Do not hide. You are the signal." The room went ice cold. Dr. Neville dropped his coffee. It shattered across the floor. Sarah stood still. That voice hadn't just spoken into the room. It had spoken into her. Meanwhile, back at Malmstrom Air Force Base, Major Rourke received a chilling update. NORAD had just confirmed sightings of the spirals over 3 nuclear facilities. All systems had failed. Launch protocols had been locked from outside the system. It wasn't just surveillance. It was control. Rourke gritted his teeth. "They're testing how far they can reach." A technician shook his head. "Sir, what if they're not testing anymore? What if they've already taken over the grid, and they're just letting us realize it slowly?" Rourke stared at the wall. The technician was probably right. And then, the red phone on the wall rang. The one that wasn't digital. He picked it up. A voice from NORAD Command said only one thing. "They're not invading. They're already here." Inside the modest concrete shelter below Helena's University, Sarah sat alone in the radio lab. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the dials of the analog transmitter, the only system left unaffected by the waves of electromagnetic interference that were disabling everything digital. The voice, that haunting, layered message, still echoed in her mind. "You are the signal." She didn't understand what it meant, but she had a theory, a terrifying one. The spirals, the line of geometric formations, the synchronized appearances, it all pointed to more than just a visitation. These weren't just probes or scout ships. This was something deeper, psychological, biological even. She ran another sweep through the low-frequency bands. There it was again. A frequency, buried under what sounded like static. But it wasn't. Slowed down and layered over itself, it revealed patterns, pulses, beats that weren't random. She overlaid them into audio spectrograms and her blood ran cold. It was a brainwave pattern, not mechanical, human. Someone, or something, was transmitting back to them from Earth. At Malmstrom, Major Rourke had summoned a conference with the heads of 3 nearby military research stations. What they shared with him confirmed Sarah's worst fear. Dr. Langford, a neuroscientist from a Department of Defense bioresearch unit, stepped forward and spoke plainly. "We've detected synchronized neural responses in test subjects across multiple locations, especially in those exposed to the spiral sightings." "Synchronized how?" Rourke asked. Langford tapped his tablet. "Subjects are experiencing identical dreams, shared visions, voices, people they've lost. In some cases, the same hallucinations." He paused. "Including messages, identical messages, in different languages." Rourke's face darkened. "So, this is mind control?" "No," Langford said quietly. "It's mind connection. They're trying to merge." Meanwhile, in a quiet house near Bozeman, 12-year-old Jacob Creighton sat silently at his dining table, sketching a perfect spiral in the center of his notebook. He'd been mute since the night the lights appeared. His parents thought it was trauma, but Jacob wasn't scared. He was listening, and then he spoke. The first words in 3 days. "They were here before us," he said. His mother dropped a dish. "What did you say?" Jacob didn't answer. He was already drawing again. This time, not just spirals, symbols, glyphs no one had taught him. Complex shapes he couldn't explain. And then he looked up, his voice suddenly older, distant, hollow. "They're not coming back. They woke up. We woke them up." At 3:16 a.m. across the United States, every analog clock stopped for exactly 60 seconds. In that moment, satellites caught a brief flash over every spiral zone. A vertical burst of light, like a needle piercing the atmosphere. But nothing was detected falling to Earth. No debris, no heat, no craft. Yet, following the flashes, seismic stations recorded tremors. Underground tremors, small but precise, the same depth, the same pattern, all across the country. They weren't coming from above anymore. They were rising. Back at the observatory, Sarah played the signal one last time, amplifying it across an old speaker. As it pulsed through the lab, she felt something in her own chest, a resonance, like the echo of a forgotten lullaby. Then, the speaker vibrated violently and cracked. A new message came through, one no one else heard. It wasn't sound. It was inside her mind. "You are the gate, the first to awaken. The others will follow." Sarah collapsed to her knees, overwhelmed by a wave of emotion she couldn't explain. Grief, wonder, awe, terror, and something else. Belonging. 4 days after the first spiral appeared over Montana, the United States stood on the edge of an awakening, though no one quite knew what they were waking into. Power had returned in some cities, only to fail again. The internet flickered in and out. Planes were grounded. Communications were sporadic. And the government, now eerily silent, had issued no further updates since the emergency alert system froze in mid-broadcast. But the spirals hadn't returned. They had finished. And now, something else had begun. In the Mojave Desert, where sandstorms had given way to eerie calm, a research team deployed by a private aerospace firm discovered a field of metallic structures, Thin, upright rods, just like the one Paul MacReady had seen, arranged in a circular formation over 2 miles wide. Each one buzzed faintly, low to the ground, just beneath human hearing. No one could move them. No one could explain how they got there. One geologist leaned down to touch one and vanished in a blink of light, just like the object itself had days earlier. His voice never returned, but his heartbeat was recorded, pulsing inside the soil for another 30 minutes. The message was clear. The ground had become a medium. Back in Helena, Sarah Wilkins stood at the edge of the university lawn, surrounded by locals. They had gathered not because they were told to, but because they felt compelled. It was quiet, too quiet. Then, as if in response to some invisible cue, every radio, every car stereo, every smart speaker and analog headset within a mile radius came to life. Not with static, but with harmony. A single tone, then another. Voices layered atop one another, not in English, but in a language deeper than language. Vibrational, emotional, intimate. People began to cry, not out of fear, but recognition. Sarah closed her eyes and let the sound wash over her. This wasn't a broadcast, it was a download, a memory, ancient and buried, unspooling within her mind. She saw a sky before cities, a race that lived not above the earth, but within it. Not aliens from the stars, but beings of resonance. Life that existed in frequencies, waves, energy. They had been part of this planet once, but they had gone to sleep when the human mind grew too loud, too fragmented, too afraid. Until now, until the spirals, until the signal. Sarah's eyes snapped open, and all around her, others were looking up, the same realization in their gaze. We were never alone. We were never first. At Malmstrom Air Force Base, Major Rourke stood in the command room with a trembling glass of water in his hand. His aides had stopped asking questions. They simply waited. And then, without warning, the base's perimeter lights rose, not because of human hands, but in response to something moving. Not ships, not creatures, beings. They walked, not floated. Shimmering outlines, humanoid in shape, made of refracted air and soft pulses of light, like glass echoing with sound. They carried no weapons. They moved without urgency, and they radiated warmth. Every soldier, even the hardened ones, lowered their rifles. No command was given. None was needed. Because in that moment, every human on base heard the same phrase, not with their ears, but in their blood. You are becoming. 2 weeks later, the world was quiet. No battles, no cities burned, no speeches from alien leaders or motherships in the sky. Just change. People across the globe began reporting moments of clarity. Empathy increased, violence decreased. Those previously suffering from deep trauma found themselves visited in dreams, not by loved ones, but by the same voice, a voice of peace, of return. Some said the visitors had left. Others said they had gone deeper. But Sarah knew the truth. They hadn't come to invade. They had come to remind us, to reawaken the part of humanity that was never meant to be disconnected. A signal buried in the chaos. A frequency inside every cell. And the spirals? They were just the key.